Okay, so we are a couple minutes after 1. We're starting a little bit late. I was just kind of waiting to see who else would pop into the room. I think we have a bit of a conflict with Mr. Ford's talk, which is also at 1 o'clock today, as to the fate of our COVID restrictions. So I guess probably most of you guys will be watching this as a recording. So maybe this will feel like a little more of a lecture today about the topics. And then if you guys have any questions, you can always just email me at jess@activelifeconditioning.com, or feel free to call me and reach out. We can always discuss specific stuff relating to your personal scenarios. Okay, so today the topic is supplements, in terms of what supplements are okay to take and what's right for you. And I was hoping to discuss kind of why people are taking certain things. But there's many supplements out there, many different reasons as to why we can take them and for what purpose. So to keep things simple for today, we're only going to cover a couple things, mainly so that I don't go too far down a rabbit hole with one thing or the other. But we'll stick with things that I think are pretty important for our current scenario, one being COVID and two being kind of winter and staying active through the winter. So first, what I'd like to start with is why supplements. Okay, why do people take supplements? What's the reasoning for them? And I think there's a lot of questions that come up when people consider taking supplements, or when people are in the process of actually taking them. So the big thing that I tend to go back to with my nutrition coaching is food preferences and food choices. So whether we are omnivores, meat eaters, vegetarian, vegan, you name it, we all have a reason or reasonings why we've chosen to eat like that. Some of it is food preference as to what we like or what we don't like. And some of it can be an ethical decision. They were choosing veganism for various ethical reasonings. That's also something to consider. And then we have gastrointestinal issues. So whether it be something like IBS or IBD or Crohn's, colitis, things down that line, that's also something to look into. And then disease. Okay, so any things that are actually impacting our health will change what we need to consider when it comes to diet and supplementation. Okay. So sticking with COVID and this current virus and everyone's concerns around health, I decided that the best way to start this topic was actually dealing with immunity. Okay, so supplements that can actually assist our immunity or aid in some way to help keep us healthy. Okay. The big supplement that everyone knows about and we hear a lot about in the media and different types of diets and different approaches to health is probiotics. Okay. Why probiotics? Okay. The number one reason I tend to get people on a good quality probiotic is that 80% of our immune system is in our gut. Okay? 80% of our immune system functions from our gut. Okay? We tend to take in bacteria, viruses, colds, you name it, through our nose and through our mouth, and that's generally how it comes in. The result of that is an immune response. Okay? If we ingest some sort of pathogen in our food, right, we can come down with a food illness, you name it. There's a lot of consequences that come with that. We can end up with a cold, right? We touch something, we touch our mouth, and it goes. So generally that response from our gut and from that ingestion is what decides the outcome following that ingestion. So generally, the way that a probiotic functions is to build up the healthy bacteria in one's intestinal system. Okay? The sole reason for taking it is to actually improve your immune system, but there are other benefits such as aiding digestion and absorption of nutrients, and things that actually improve our health along with that. Now, why are probiotics necessary, right? Probiotics are something that's relatively new in supplementation. If you go back 20, 30 years, it was pretty unheard of. But now it tends to be something that's kind of at the forefront of, okay, well, you show up in your doctor's office, you show up in your naturopath's office, and you have certain complaints, and usually the topic of probiotics comes up. Okay? Why is that? Well, our food chain has changed. Okay? If you think back to hunter and gatherer times, or even times during the Depression and during the wars, right? We generally grew food from the ground and we ate it, or we had cattle and we ate it, right? We don't necessarily do that now. We tend to go to a grocery store and buy what we need. We tend to thoroughly wash all of our fruits and vegetables, and the food chain, the end result of that is a bit different. And why that's different is previously we used to get most of our bacteria actually from soil. Okay, you could walk out to the garden, pull a carrot out of the ground, dust off the dirt, and eat it. I know I did that as a kid, and probably some people still do it now, but it tends not to be our pattern. We tend to go to the grocery store and eat it, especially now with COVID, we soak everything and wash it before we eat it. We don't know who touched it before us. So there's no dirt, there's no organism, there's nothing on it that we're actually ingesting anymore. So that intake is far, far less. There's also a factor of kind of physical disconnection with nature. So actually going outside, getting our hands dirty, that type of stuff, and getting exposure to bacteria and viruses, we tend to minimize that stuff. We're washing our hands, we're using sanitizers, all great COVID things, but they do affect our immune exposure from a gut standpoint. Okay? So negative stress on the gut can also change our bacterial count. So the number one thing that tends to negatively affect our gut is broad spectrum antibiotics. So in the past, if you've had a series of infections where you've had to be on an antibiotic or you're prescribed something, those antibiotics, usually broad spectrum ones, are not selective in terms of what they kill. They kind of kill all bacteria, good and bad. Okay? So generally now the recommendation is when you're on an antibiotic, you are also taking a probiotic with that to help rebuild things. That's also a reason why some people taking certain types of antibiotics tend to have some gut complaints during or afterwards. So it's always a good idea to keep that up with probiotics. Some prescription drugs as well can affect your gut bacteria. Stress is a big one. So stress, we find very stressed individuals, whether it's physical or mental stress, doesn't really matter, but stressed individuals tend to have a weaker functioning gut. Some of that is from a bacterial standpoint, so that is also something to consider. Sleep, or I should say lack of sleep tends to negatively affect our gut. Poor diet and lifestyle. I mean, poor diet is a big one. So I would say if you tend to eat a lot of processed items, foods that come from a bag or a box, those things are pretty much devoid in healthy bacteria. There's a lot of ingredients on those labels that we can't actually even pronounce. So a lot of processed things that definitely change the microbiome in our gut. Okay? For those who eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, great, you're getting a little bit more from that. But there's also fiber and other prebiotic substances within those foods that help that bacteria thrive in our gut. I won't go too far down that because I don't want to overload you with prebiotics and probiotics. So we'll just stick with the probes. So basically, it's a conversation that you need to have with yourself about, okay, what is my gut feeling like? Do I have regular bowel movements? Do I feel good? Do I have brain fog? Do I have a good amount of energy throughout the day, or am I pretty sluggish? Do I eat and I get bloated? Do I eat and things move through quite well? It's a general observation of how you feel on a daily basis. I would say in general, if you feel bloated or sluggish after eating, your energy is not great. You don't wake up and you're ready to go after maybe a cup of coffee or whatever. Those are things that it can be a sign that your microbiome is off and your gut is off, and it might need a little bit of assistance. Okay. So the other part that comes up before we get into actual strains of probiotics and which ones are good to take is the argument of, well, I eat a lot of yogurt, I drink kombucha and kefir, and I have a lot of those items. That's great. Those items are very helpful when it comes to actual gut bacteria and actually building that up. But they don't work as well as a specific soil-based bacterial supplement. So the reason for that is when we ingest something like yogurt is generally like a lactobacillus or an acidophilus strain of bacteria that when we eat it, the first place that yogurt ends up is in our stomach. Our stomach has a really high level of stomach acid, which purpose is to break down our food and fight off some bacteria that may have been ingested. And what we find is that with those items, most of that does not survive stomach acid. And why that matters is that we actually need that bacteria in our small intestine and further down along the line. So after we pass our stomach, we hit our small intestine. That's the bulk of the bacteria, and that's where it needs to make it. Those items, because they are a bacterial item, we get confused. We think, oh, well, I have a lot of yogurt, ingest those items, I don't really need a probiotic. And that may be the case. Okay, some of it gets through, some of it doesn't. Most of the research is pointing to most of it doesn't. Okay, so what we need people to really realize when it comes to actual gut health is we need strongly fermented things. So more things like sauerkraut and fermented pickles and things that have different bacterial strains, and then actually ingesting some soil-based bacteria. Right. So soil-based bacteria are the ones that are most studied now. So we've come a long way in terms of probiotics. Soil-based bacteria are the ones that are most natural. So again, going back to like 20, 30, 40 years ago, when we actually still ate things with dirt on them, those are the ones that successfully make it to our small intestine and actually populate the intestine and keep it healthy. So those ones, if you're looking on the back of probiotic bottles, those ones are actually of the Bacillus brand, Bacillus species. So we have Bacillus coagulans, which is the most common one, and then there's a couple more that come along with that. If you can find a blend of Bacillus, that's your go-to from a soil-based probiotic standpoint. A lot of the times now you'll go to a health food store and there'll be probably 20 different options. I usually get people to start with the Bacillus one first and see how you feel. Okay. There are so many different options that honestly, some people do well on one type and some people do well on another. I find on average, Bacillus is good across the board with a few exceptions. Okay. So there's really no right or wrong. You can experiment with them a little bit and see how you do. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So the last one that I would discuss from a probiotic standpoint is actually a healthy fungus called Saccharomyces boulardii. So Saccharomyces boulardii is actually a non-pathogenic yeast, and it can be beneficial for a lot of people. Sometimes we can end up with almost like a yeast overgrowth, and we see that with yeast infections and other things along those lines. Some skin disorders, things like that. So sometimes we can add in a Saccharomyces boulardii and see some positive results. But if anyone has any questions with that, feel free to reach out. If you're looking for a probiotic for your specific purpose, I can talk you through the ins and outs of that as well. Okay. So lastly, with probiotics, the recommendation is about 5 to 10 billion units per day, which sounds like a lot. It's not. Typically, you can start with about 5 billion, see how you feel, right? It's kind of a symptomatic thing that you need to figure out. So if you have a lot of digestive complaints or brain fog or trouble digesting foods, start with 5 billion. See if you notice a change. If you don't, you can increase from there. Okay. If you still don't notice the difference, again, we can switch the type of species, the strain that you're taking, and see if you get a change in results. Okay. Okay. So again, why probiotics? The simple fact is that 80% of our immune system functions from our gut. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Okay, let me just switch my notes here. Okay, we don't have time. Okay, so the next step, further to immunity. So I wanted to talk on some specific tips as it relates to our immune system actually staying healthy. So there's kind of three things that I tend to tell people to aim for. One being healthy gut. Okay, so still going back to that, let's evaluate your diet, see what you're taking in, and then probiotics if needed, based on what we find. Okay, if you tend to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, great. Meats, good quality in terms of variety, that's awesome. And then consider what symptoms you're experiencing. Okay. The second, in terms of immunity, is actually balancing blood sugar. So we had touched on blood sugar in my previous talk a few weeks ago, and how important actually knowing what your blood pressure is and paying attention to it. It does affect your immunity. So high blood pressure is usually associated with some other conditions as well, but we do see an actual lower response from the immune system with complications of high blood sugar. So you guys probably also saw on the list of higher risk COVID people is diabetes, okay, and high blood sugar. So again, it's another thing that we can do and be conscious of to help things run smooth. Okay. The third point would be increasing specific nutrients to control inflammation. Okay. A lot of the times what I see is that people tend to separate the two. They tend to think, oh, inflammation is one thing and immune system is the other. Oh, I have inflamed joints, I have arthritis, I have whatever it may be. We have to understand that inflammation is an immune response from our body. So our immune system creates that inflammation, and that inflammation is a strain on our body, and that is how we should view it. If we have some inflammatory issues, it will take away from our immune system's ability to fight off any bacteria or viruses or other issues we may come across. Okay. So top three is healthy gut, balance your blood sugar, and increase nutrients to decrease inflammation. Okay. So my favorite four, and the four that I tend to get people thinking about, are zinc, vitamin C, magnesium, and vitamin D. Okay. Hopefully you guys have all heard of those, but let's start with zinc. Okay. So zinc basically improves immune system cell response. Okay. It scavenges free radicals and it works as an antioxidant. Okay. For those of us that are super active and do a lot of cardiovascular exercise and lifting weights, we do produce free radicals when we do that, a lot of oxidants in our body. So we should consume a diet that's pretty high in antioxidants and take supplements that act as antioxidants, zinc being one of the strongest ones. Okay. So that doesn't mean you need to pop zinc. You can take zinc if you want, but you can eat foods that are high in zinc. So the best foods that are high in zinc would be meat, eggs, dairy, and then other vegetarian sources would be things like legumes, seeds, nuts, but know that largely those vegetarian sources, such as legumes, tend to come along with phytates, which can block the absorption of zinc. So the better sources would be the meat sources, but if you choose not to eat meat, you can go a little bit heavier on the legumes and the nuts and seeds as well. Okay. The next one up is vitamin C. So everyone has heard of vitamin C, and how vitamin C kind of helps fight off colds, etc. So vitamin C doesn't keep you from getting sick. Vitamin C actually helps you fight off that virus or that cold. Okay. Vitamin C directly improves your immune system response. Okay. It works with the immune cells to actually help that response. So there's a difference between, I guess, actually keeping you from getting sick and actually fighting the battle, and vitamin C fights the battle. Okay. Vitamin C also helps us reduce stress. Okay, so those of us who have a pretty high stress level, or even if that's a pretty high stress level from exercise, vitamin C does help bring that down, and it also lowers inflammation. Okay. People with tendency to exercise a lot, whether it be cardiovascular or strength training, we tend to have some inflammation that comes along with that. So we forget that all that activity we do create inflammation, we do create muscle damage, and we need specific nutrients to help lower that as well. Because again, high inflammation, that takes away from the strength of our immune system. Okay. So next up is magnesium. So magnesium, there's a couple different varieties of magnesium. I do not suggest anybody take magnesium oxide. That can result in some significant loose stools. Okay, so if you choose to do magnesium, you definitely want a magnesium citrate or magnesium glycinate or magnesium threonate. They tend to be a little more expensive than magnesium oxide, but trust me, don't do oxide. Okay. So what is magnesium's role? Magnesium is basically a cofactor for immunoglobulins. Okay, so they help fight off illness as well, just right along there with vitamin C. Okay, so magnesium in most people can become deficient by stress. So we have magnesium in every single cell of our body, and it is used in processes to actually lower stress, whether that is physical or mental. Okay, so a lot of physical stress, whether that's riding your bike for hours and hours throughout the week, or tons of lifting, tons of cardiovascular workouts, a lot of high intensity stuff, we tend to deplete magnesium pretty quickly. So actually taking a magnesium supplement is quite effective. You'll find now a lot of drinks that you'll put in drink mixes to support exercise are actually adding magnesium now, because they're finding that it is quite helpful. If you're ever exercising and you get muscular cramps, cramps at night, calf cramps, leg cramps, you name it, that is a sign that you are low in magnesium, and you should probably add some in. Again, you can take it as a supplement, or you can eat foods that are high in magnesium. Okay, I find a lot of people forget that we get magnesium from our foods, but they're not usually the most popular foods. So where we get a lot of it is fatty fish. So if you don't like fish, you don't eat fish, or if you only like specific kinds, you're missing out on a great source. The best being salmon, mackerel, and halibut. Okay, any of those fatty, oily fishes will do it, but those are the top three. Other sources would be beans, flax, dark chocolate, not milk chocolate, dark chocolate. Okay, avocado, nuts, bananas, and greens. So greens are a big source of magnesium. So kale, collard greens, spinach, turnip greens, and mustard greens. Okay, So if you're making soups and stews and things this winter, like toss those greens in, cook them up. It's an easy way to sneak them in. A lot of people don't like them because they tend to be bitter and they're a bit rough to eat. They're great in soups and stews. You can even fine chop them and put them in a chili, and you're good to go. Okay. Okay, and then the last one, the fourth one, and the one that most people have heard about, is vitamin D. Okay, so vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. Okay, so the other fat-soluble vitamins are A, E, and K. So A, D, E, and K are our fat-soluble vitamins that are stored in our fat cells. Okay, they are fairly important in the sense that we need a certain amount of them to function well, but they are also fat stored in our fat cells, so there is a maximum that we need as well. So if you take too much of these fat soluble vitamins, there is a risk of toxicity. Okay, and I say that because we don't want to take too much vitamin D, but we want to know that we have enough. Okay, so I would recommend anyone, before you start taking vitamin D, to go and get an actual blood panel done and do a blood draw and actually see what your level is at. Okay. I like to see people's numbers above 160. That tends to be there's a good immune response that comes from that, and people will actually feel better above 160. But as you go in and look on your printout, and it'll give you a reading as to where you are on that sliding scale. Okay. So vitamin D, I mean, it's the sunshine vitamin. We tend to get more in the summer or when the sun's directly above us. Okay? If we don't have a shadow, that's the best time to get your sun. That's the best intake of actual conversion of vitamin D. But we tend to negatively affect that when we do things like sunscreens, hats, long sleeves, stuff where the sun's not actually touching our skin or actually being used. I'm not saying in any way you should not use sunscreen or cover up your skin, because that is a necessary thing to do. But know that it simply takes 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure to get enough to actually bump up your levels of vitamin D. We also live in an area, those of you who are local, we live in an area that can be pretty gray in the winter. So it's different than, say, you're out in Alberta where it's nice and sunny all the time, or in BC where some people escape to in the winter. Here we tend to have a lot of gray days, and that means no sun. Okay, so typically supplementing some vitamin D can help bump up our levels as well during that time. Okay. I would say for most people, 1,000 IUs a day is the minimum. But you can go as high as 4,000 IUs a day from a supplemental standpoint without any real issues of toxicity. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so other food sources of vitamin D would be, again, oily fish. So salmon, herring, sardines, mackerel. You can even take cod liver oil on a spoon like they used to do. Cod liver oil is actually very high in vitamin A and other omega-3s as well, so not a bad supplement to take. Vitamin D we get from red meat and from liver. So if any of you like liver and onions, bring it back. That's a great source. Egg yolks. So if you're going to eat eggs and you only eat your egg whites, maybe reconsider from a vitamin D standpoint. Put a couple of yolks in there, and you get a good substantial amount as well. And mushrooms. So mushrooms, I like mushrooms. Mushrooms are kind of amazing. They're like us. Okay, we get our vitamin D and we get the conversion from the sun. The mushrooms do the same. Okay, so mushrooms produce vitamin D from their exposure to sunlight. It's a slightly different form. We make D3, they make D2, but the D2 is actually a pretty easily converted one to help us. Okay. So add some mushrooms to things. Okay. Again, okay, so just to wrap that up, immunity would be zinc, vitamin C, magnesium, vitamin D. Okay. Fight against COVID. Okay. So let's do a quick, we got a couple minutes here where I'll just touch on post-workout. So we had briefly talked about it from a blood sugar standpoint in our last talk, just as to, okay, what should I have after my workout to help stabilize blood sugar levels. For the intended topic of supplements, post-workout can be considered a couple different ways. Some people like the post-workout shake. Some people just like to eat food. Both are good. I personally like to eat food. I think food is a better source, tastes a lot better. And as long as you're smart about your post-workout nutrition, you can actually achieve the same thing. But if you're in a rush, you're in a hurry, or you just don't want to think about food, the shake option also works. Okay. So post-workout, really what you're trying to do from a supplementation standpoint is supply certain nutrients to cover a number of processes. Okay. The first one being supplying protein and certain nutrients to actually help protein synthesis and help repair. Okay. If you eat a good amount of meat in your diet, you're probably covered. If you tend to lack on meat and actual protein sources, a good quality whey protein or pea protein, even branched chain amino acids, those can help in shake form to actually give you a little bit extra. I would say 20 to 40 grams of whey protein is a typical dose for a shake. Okay. Anything above that is just kind of excess. You don't really need to do it. Okay. So second thing that you're going to want to put in that post-workout meal or shake would be carbohydrates, basically to restore those energy substrates you just used in your workout. Okay. So main energy substrates kind of depends on the type of workout you do. If you're doing a lot of high intensity, like less than 15 seconds bursts of sprinting or maximal load deadlifts, stuff like that, you're basically working in like your phosphocreatine energy pathway, right? That's a whole nother thing we could talk about. But sometimes people supplement creatine for that. Not necessary unless you actually want to. You do get creatine from meat. So that's our best natural source of creatine. So again, like athletes who are sprinting, doing a lot of heavy load lifting, again, you have creatine, or you choose a good meat source. Okay. For athletes who are doing kind of still anaerobic, but largely under 2 minutes of intensity on repeated efforts, we're mainly going to burn muscle glycogen. Okay, so muscle glycogen and liver glycogen storage will be depleted, so we're replenishing that with a good carbohydrate source, a good glucose source to bump it back up. Okay. So aerobic type athletes that are doing kind of larger, sorry, this is my dog, larger than 2 minutes in terms of actual exercise length, you're still going to want to replenish those carbohydrates. So we're still kind of depleting stores as we do that. So any carbs post-workout would help. Okay. So good carbohydrates for workout. Easy ones are fruit. You could do, okay. You could do, you could do any carbohydrates you like. Fruit tend to be a pretty quick one because they're pretty high in glucose. So that's a good one. Okay. The other thing you want to consider is what's in that meal or that shake that's going to counter inflammation. Okay, so again, any exercise, any movement is going to create some inflammation. It's going to create muscle damage. And we want to do some stuff to actually bring that down. Antioxidants are the best thing that you can do. So blueberries, tart cherries, those things are super high in antioxidants. Taurine is a specific supplement you can take to help reduce oxidative stress. If you want to take it in pill form, that's kind of a bodybuilding one, but that works. The other thing you can consider is coffee. So caffeinated coffee has a lot of antioxidants. So that would be one. Typically, I tell people to drink the coffee before the workout. Coffee and caffeine specifically has a bit of an ability to lower how we perceive pain. So for people who are doing a pretty intense workout, a lot of repeated efforts, caffeine can actually help us a little bit there. Tend not to take it after though. After caffeine post-workout tends to raise cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone that we don't necessarily need post-workout. So ideally take it before, but either way, it tends to help. Sometimes I know, Jack, you're not on this specific call today, but you'll probably listen to this later. I know for cyclists, a lot of you guys do the mid-ride coffee stop. So the mid-ride coffee stop is actually pretty great because you get a little caffeine burst to get you home, but it does help with that muscular fatigue and that pain that you get. It gives you a little bit of assistance there too. Okay? So also from inflammation, you want to avoid unhealthy fats or inflammatory fats. So fried foods, anything that's cooked in seed oils or canola oil, soybean oil, that type of stuff, it tends to be inflammatory. So try and lessen that in your diet. Okay. Healthy oils would be a better choice. So if you're doing the food, you're going to want to do avocados, again, oily fish, omega-3s, that type of stuff. Okay. The other thing that you can consider with inflammation is other ways to reduce muscle soreness. So reducing muscle soreness, for some people, it can be that delayed onset muscle soreness. So sore from your workout the day before or 2 days previous, where like you're still struggling to get up and down out of a chair, your legs are sore, you can't wash your hair in the shower, that type of soreness. That's what we're looking at, okay, reevaluate what you're doing for a workout, but you can also supplement things like curcumin. So curcumin is a anti-inflammatory that comes from turmeric. You could try that. Magnesium will help with some of that soreness too. And then any topical aids. So we have some topical rub-on aids that tend to help, things that contain menthol. doTERRA does a couple different blends. Sage Natural does some blends. Those things will help too, from a soreness perspective. Okay. And the last thing is just providing some nutrients, so building block nutrients to actually help those repair processes. Okay, so to actually help repair muscle and actually aid in recovery. One of the biggest ones is vitamin D. So vitamin D actually helps us with protein synthesis. A lot of people don't really consider vitamin D as that. They think of it as immunity and avoiding things like SAD, so seasonal affective disorder. But it actually is one of the big factors in protein synthesis. So if you are hitting the gym and you want to get stronger and you want to improve and you want to see changes to those numbers, check your vitamin D. If it's low and you bump it back up, you're going to notice a huge difference in your actual performance. Okay. The other one is glutamine. So glutamine is something, a simple addition to your water or to your shake, or actually water's a good one because then you can listen to Mark's previous talk on how important water is. You can add 2 to 10 grams to your water and you actually get a pretty good dose of glutamine for the day. But again, that's biosynthesis of proteins, so actually helping us rebuild. Okay. And the other one is zinc. So going back to my other favorite is zinc. It is a super antioxidant and it helps actually decrease the inflammatory response. Okay. Okay, I think that's everything there. So you could do a shake, right? You could do whey protein and some milk or some water. Add a banana, blitz it up. You got your carbs. You could add blueberries to it to give you a little extra dose of antioxidants. If you want to get a little crazy, you could add some curcumin or some turmeric directly to that and drink it down. Some guys like to add creatine to it. You could do that. There's just kind of a specific dosing kind of step that you need to do to actually load creatine properly. Again, if you want to do that, just let me know. We can have a separate conversation. Otherwise, just choose a good, nice balanced meal. So going back to that protein, vegetables, good source of carbohydrates, and a good healthy fat. Okay, so post-workout, nail the meal and you'll feel great. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of it for time. If anyone has any specific questions as it relates to your own specific supplementation, feel free to reach out. I tried to keep it, relating to our current scenario with COVID and how we can assist that, and then giving you some tips to actually stay healthy after exercising. But yeah, I'm open to conversations about any other style of supplementation if you want. So feel free. Hopefully that wasn't too much information for one session. But as we continue forward in these talks and in coaching, I'm sure we can get a little more specific. Okay. Great. So we will leave it at that.